we as a society cut on this fast track and losing some fundamental, important social and interpersonal relationship. And COVID allow us to get off the train and slow down and put back in perspective where the priorities in life. That is not making money, become famous, be super efficient. The interpersonal relationship, a little bit more apparent to spend more time with your family, with your kids.
Welcome to Straight Talk, where we cut through the BS and get straight into real conversations with some of the best minds on the planet, accelerating our awareness of the biggest issues impacting our lives and the future of humanity. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Alpha Malhotra here, your host at Straight Talk. Once again, we are at a very, very important stage in our mission to accelerate awareness, to spread knowledge to over 1 million people in the world, and do that in a democratized way. And today's discussion, today's episode, is with a very important individual who is for many people, an expert and a familiar name in the field that he is a specialist in. And for many of us, his specialism in what he does is going to open our eyes to some of the things that we often forget when it comes to human development, health development, how we live our lives, how we manage stress, how we augment our lifestyles for a better existence. And the gentleman on the show today is Dr. Alessio Fasano, who I will read here, apart from being, of course, the author of Gut Feelings. That's his book, The Microbiome of Our Health. He's also professor and director at the Mucosal Immunology and Biology Research Center at MassGeneral Hospital in the United States. He's advancing innovation at a rapid pace with his research, his experience in clinical care and education that he is pioneering at the hospital, especially around looking at how one can improve their quality of life if you are enduring celiac disease and other gluten-related disorders. He's also the founder and director of the Center for Celiac Research and Treatment at MassGeneral in Boston, and he oversees a lot of practices and support for teams that are supporting children and adults who suffer from celiac disease. It's an awful condition. We all will know someone who has that condition, as well as other autoimmune chronic inflammatory conditions, which unfortunately I'm a veteran in. And so this is personal for me. It's not just an informative exercise. It's a learning exercise for me personally, because I probably need to change my life in some way, shape, or form, thanks to the advice this gentleman is going to give us. So without further ado, Dr. Fasano, how would you like me to refer to you? Dr. Fasano or Alessio? What do you prefer?
Alessio, please.
Alessio, thank you for coming on our show. You're a very, very important man, a busy man, and a game changer. So I'm privileged to have you on the show. I will start by going right into it. We're going to go right into it because there's this huge brain and experience base that you have and your lived experience that I'm going to try and selfishly take loads from. But I'm going to start by just setting the scene. As you all know, who are fans listening to our show, we have 4 important themes we care about. I won't repeat all of them, but right the way from digital world order to being human. And Alessio said to me right at the beginning of the show, he said, listen, Af, I've explored what you're doing, and I want to talk about the intersection between what I'm doing and everything else that you've covered, because they're all important, because it starts from the foundations of why something is the way it is. And I think it's important to do that. So I'm grateful that you've done your research too, and you're going to be able to set the scene here. So my first question really for you is, tell us about, and we start with the personal stuff, Alessio, usually, because it's important to know who you're talking to before you jump the gun, So tell us a little bit about who you are. I know you're in the States, obviously. And how did you get to the States? Were you always there? What's your backstory, just for a moment? How did you end up being the person you are in this field of study?
This is going to be an unglamorous story, but again, I believe that would be much more appealing and tangible to understand and bring down to the ground. The personal story. I am a pediatric gastroenterologist by training. When I was in medical school in Naples, because I'm Italian, and I did my training there, I was in this state of mind of save the world. And for me, save the world was, kids, because I was very much interested in pediatrics. And I went to, one of the professors of my schools, and they say, to save the world, I need to be focused on cancer. HIV was starting at that point. I said, I will do research in that area and help alleviating this aggravation in terms of, impact on kids' health. And the fellow said, you sure can do that, but if you really want to make a difference, you should be focused on diarrheal diseases. And I said, what are you talking about? This is not that, glamorous, diarrheal diseases. This is something that will not make a difference. And they said, with all due respect, we lose 5 million kids a year on diarrheal diseases, mainly due to infection like cholera, like Shigella, Salmonella, and so on and so forth. And of course, that, sparkled my interest. And the following few years, I was focused on trying to understand the mechanism of how the intestine works and how these microorganisms cross-talk with us to lead to this clinical outcome. And again, in my naive approach, at a certain point, I told my boss, listen, I think that I know everything that I need to know about the gut. I need to know a little bit more about the microorganism. Otherwise, this crosstalk is not very clear to me.
Right.
And it's like, the only way to do that, you got to go to the United States. And you need to go a place in which they deal with this microorganism. They know the ins and outs. At that beginning, human genome was not even in the thinking, but the genetic editing of stuff, cutting and pasting was at the very beginning. So you got to go there. There is a place that's called the Center for Vaccine Development, and you can learn a little bit more about the bacteria and how they interact with us, what to do about it, so on and so forth. So I went with a 3 months, scholarship to Baltimore that translate in 3 years to develop a vaccine against cholera. And I was given the task to develop an attenuated live vaccine, because that would induce a much better response by taking the weapon that we knew at that time that was, this toxin that can really be very dangerous, that will make people to die because the purge of water that comes out. I did everything under the sun. I did the experiments. I cut the genes, the pasting, the animal models. Bottom line, at a certain point, we reached the point that this can be given to volunteers, meaning medical students.
Right.
That for a relatively, important amount of money, $350, will have 3 chances to get placebo, so they will not get sick, to get my vaccine, and I reassure them that they will not get sick, or get the real deal, cholera, but we will take care of them big time. So long story short, we did this trial and went miserable. Right. The kids that they got the vaccine didn't got the 30 liters of diarrhea of the ones they got the real deal, but I got 7-8 liters of diarrhea that was unacceptable as a vaccine. So,
oh my God,
literally flushed to the toilet. That was pretty much the story. Wow. And then I got drunk a couple of days. I stayed home, and then the blackboard again said, why? And in studying, what else this microorganism was doing, I discovered a new toxin that made the intestine to get leakier, so increased the permeability of the gut. With that, I start to try to understand why we have such complex machinery to make the gut leak. And I reasoned that, eventually cholera was smart enough to mimic something that we do for a living. Yeah. And I discovered in 2000 a molecule is called zonulin that's what it does, modulate gut permeability. And then the following 20 years, not me, but the entire scientific community linked this to a variety of chronic inflammatory diseases, including autoimmune disease, neurodegenerative disease, cancer, and so on and so forth. The rest is history. So that's why I'm here, because of failed vaccine.
Yeah. Can I say one or two things? I want to just comment on what you've just said. I took a few things away from it in terms of life lessons. I think the first thing was, of course, when you are on a mission to and purpose-driven mission where you want to try and solve a problem because you believe it is impacting, in this case, there were children who died, 5 million, where it's impacting society, communities, civilization in some way. It's a very important realization because we talk a lot about purpose on the show. And sometimes people don't know what that means. In fact, I get a question saying, how do I know when I found my purpose? It might sound odd to you because of the field you're in, but for people who are not in fields that are directly connected to life and death, it's odd. But that's one thing I picked up. You were clear about your purpose. The other thing actually is failure. That was brilliant because, when something goes terribly wrong, and it happens all of the time. I mean, that's the basis of experimentation. It is called experimentation because there is a high probability it won't work. And it's very important to realize that as human beings, because I know you'll talk about state of mind and other factors that affect the gut as well. But I think the programming of the mind and the way we look at our lives, the busyness of our lives, city lives, urban lives and stuff, we've lost sight of some of these realizations where a failure and the loss and disappointment that comes from it is a default. It's just the default, and so it's almost certain it's going to happen. It's not uncertain. It's not uncertainty. It's certainty that you're going to fail. But you end up at this point where you are now. So you wrote this book.
Can I make 2 comments on what you just said?
Please.
In my opinion, are important for the general audience here. Science is a constellation of failure with very few successes. We only read the success. Nobody wants to know the number of experiments didn't work, or they failed, they went the wrong directions, and so on and so forth. So, what you read in the newspapers or in the scientific article are there few successes. And the second thing is, and this applies to everybody, you will not remember your successes. They will brush it off, but you will remember your failures. Those are the building block of growing as a human beings, because they're lesson learned. You make that mistake and you make sure that you don't do that again. So much more impactful the mistake that you make in life than the successes. That's my personal opinion. Yeah,
it's beautifully said, and a very important reminder for many people who are enthralled and caught up in success, because that's what is defined these days as being the pinnacle of existence. So that's great. So that's a really interesting background. And now you're at MassGeneral. You wrote this book in 2022, and that caught is that correct? 2022, you wrote the book, it released? Yep. Okay. And you did write it. I must recognize Susie Flaherty. You wrote it with her as well.
Yep.
And something triggered in my mind. I'll share it with you. I'm just expressing my thought. As soon as I saw the date of the book, I always like to look at the date of the book, and I look at the number of pages. It triggers a few things in my head. They're not correlators, or they don't mean what I'm going to say to you necessarily, but they do give me a sense of the depth and the detail and the complexity of what you're covering here. The 500 pages is a lot of pages, of course, and so it's not an overnight read. That's for sure. I can tell you that much myself. The timing of your book, I have to tell you, is excellent from my humble perspective, because I always believe in life. I've failed many times and been through many traumas. A great remedy at the wrong time is not really going to change the world, unfortunately, with saying it diplomatically, as in there'll be zilch value. But your book is very well timed, because coming out of COVID, and I'll ask you for your view because you're the expert, it feels as if through all of my dialogues and all of our research, there have been some good things coming out of COVID in terms of the betterment of society, new habits, new values, new ways of looking at home life, work life, and so on and so forth. And there have been some terrible things that have happened because of COVID as well. Tell me a little bit about why you wrote this book. I mean, why did you have to write it, and why did you feel you needed to write it now?
I didn't want to write it. It was a daunting operation. And, I was approached by the publisher, MIT Press, and said, you know what, it is time to write a evidence-based scientific book on microbiome. There are starting popping up a lot of fantasies out there, but not factual, and people that are not really experts in the field. And we believe that, it's time to put a little bit of order of a very dynamic field. And we believe that you're the right person to do that. And I said, listen, this is not the right time to write this book, because we are in the very exponential growth of the field. It's too dynamic. Imagine this, Af. At the time, we had an average of 400 or 500 papers a day published on the microbiome. So in a matter of a week, what was written the week before was obsolete. It said, you write a book that's there for ages there, and it's going to be obsolete by the time that we finish. And the fellow said, listen, there must be some foundational information that you can put forward, so that no matter how the field progresses, this will still be acceptable. So Susie and I, we sat down and said, well, are we up to this? And eventually we started. This was before COVID, and I said, all the publishers said, you have a deadline and you got to give me this book by this deadline. And we tried to respect it, and then we did give the book, and the rule was, you do not touch this book ever again. Now it's only cosmetic. And COVID kicked in, and I told the guy, I said, you cannot publish this book without allowing us to talk about COVID. So here we go going in here, this chapter here, this chapter there, we have to add this information and so on and so forth. And you are absolutely right. There were a lot of bad things that happened during COVID. I was a first responder, and I would never have imagined in my wildest, hypothesis to be in a war zone, because that's what it was, Boston at that time. I'm a pediatrician. I've been taking care of 80 years old people, terminal, disease on the ventilator. I felt like a doctor on a war zone. I mean, that was unimaginable. So definitely bad things I've seen and experienced. But the good thing is that we, at least in my very personal experience with COVID, we as a society got on this fast track and losing some fundamental, important social and interpersonal relationship. And COVID allowed us to get off the train and slow down. And put back in perspective where the priorities in life. That is not making money, become famous, be super efficient, and the interpersonal relationship became a little bit more apparent, to spend more time with your family, with your kids. In other words, resetting the priority in different ways. Also, when you experience death firsthand at that level, we had hundreds of people dying every day. So back to the book, when we eventually locked everything that was published, you're right, by serendipity, that is my favorite English word, end up to be written at the right time, at the right place, with the right people. And I have to say that, the publishers was correct. I mean, some fundamental information there would not change. The details of how this progress will, of course, and what will be the practical impact. But the fundamental, information will be there for a while.
Talking about fundamental and foundational information, I know this is probably going to be elementary for you, but it's important. Many people on this show, again, this is about awareness. It's about accelerating awareness. Many people on this show may or may not pick up the book and read 500 pages. Some might open it, read one chapter and put it down. And this is what's happening these days anyway. Our attention span has reduced a lot. So people might actually use it as a reference guide to some extent. Maybe go to a chapter and say, well, that's interesting, and close it, or read a summary or whatever it may be. Nevertheless, what's very important, which needs to come across on this show today, is people need to understand why it's important to be aware of what is a microbiome and what is this thing about the gut. And we all know about it. We all have, IBS or celiac, or someone's got some other condition, or someone's got phlegm, someone has a dairy intolerance, and it goes on, the list goes on and on and on and on. As you probably know, the whole food supply chain has a lot to do with it. Of course, I'm sure you know that, and you'll educate us on it. Can you, in the simplest way possible, which is horrible to say to someone who is an expert, help us understand, how does the gut work, and why should anyone even care about the microbiome?
Okay, to do this correctly, I need to give a little bit of background, very short.
Yeah.
Not about
no, that's fine. It's fine.
Why this attention to microbiome? How did that all start? Okay. Many years ago, we embraced what was the Human Genome Project. And I know that it's been discussed on this podcast by other speakers and so on and so forth. Why we did that? Because we were convinced that if we, resolve the entire human genome, we will have the key to resolve all the disease in humankind. At that time, the paradigm was one gene, one product, meaning one protein, one disease. Okay. It took 30 years and billions of dollars to finish the Human Genome Project, to realize that the unthinkable, that genetically we're extremely rudimental. We're made on only 29,000 genes. So not definitely enough to explain all the disease of humankind. I say rudimental because a worm that we use to go fishing has 75,000 genes, 3 times more than we do. Plants like, wheat that has the gluten that is the offending material for people with celiac disease, other gluten-rich, 150,000 genes. Granted, we were not supposed to be, on the top of the chain because it took meteor shower to whip it up the dinosaurs, and there we were able to get it off the tree and become, the ones that built the Colosseum and the Eiffel Tower, the all 9 yards. But again, genetically speaking, we are not that sophisticated, and that did not explain the complexity of the matter. What happened at that time was that microbiology, going back to the beginning of this chat that I had with you, when I went to Baltimore, the only way to study microorganisms is to look at them under a microscope or to cultivate that in a flask. And, now the technology that was developed with the Human Genome Project allow us to get rid of that rudimental and ultra-centenarian techniques and forward in 21st century. So in other words, look at the entire ecosystem of the microbes, not under the microscope, not with the culture, but with genetics, using the technique that we use for Human Genome Project. And what we appreciate is that the wealth of microorganisms that we are submersed in, it's much more complex. What we were looking was the tip of the iceberg, 5% of this complexity. So a new world opened up. And so we understand that we are immersed in these microorganisms. We have even more microorganisms than our own cells. If we will be able to see them, we will be discussed. I am not talking with Af. I'm talking with a wealth of microorganisms that live with us and make have whatever he is. And again, the most complex ecosystem that we have in our body is in the gut. Meaning that we have, of course, microorganisms on the skin. We know that we have microorganisms in the airways and urinary tract, but the more complex ecosystem, the one that impacts the most on our health, is in the gut, for several reasons. One, the gut is the largest interface that we have with the environment. We see the skin because it's visible, but the GI tract is 50 times more expanded as an interface with the environment. If you take your gut, my gut, you stretch on a floor, it takes a double tennis court. It's 200 square meters. It's huge. So it's the largest way that we interact with the environment. And this interaction, how this all goes, depends on this microbiota or microbiome. What is that? It's this community of microorganisms that live in the, if everything goes well, in a friendly relationship with us, what we call a symbiotic relationship. And to bring this to a clear understanding, it's like a farm with different animals. We have cows, we have horses, we have pigs, sheep, chicken, and we want to farm with different animals because this will serve our need in terms of the economy of the farm. And, what makes the microbiome so interesting, so this ecosystem that is made by bacteria, viruses, parasites, archaea, and so on and so forth, is that this relationship implies a crosstalk all the time. So we discuss our well-being with this, ecosystem, with this microbiota, and what they're capable to do. And this has been revolutionary, is that this discussion is on the genetic ground. So in other words, the microbiota is capable to decide if, when, why, and how our genes will be put in motion to switch from, let's say, a genetic predisposition to a clinical outcome. This has been revolutionary because, again, in the past, we were under the impression that if F has the gene to develop an autoimmune disease 20 years ago, you can't do anything about this. That was destiny.
Right.
The acceleration of these chronic inflammatory diseases that we have seen in the past 30, 40 years, and only the people that embrace a Western lifestyle, not in India, not in North Africa, but in Europe, in North America, in Australia, implies that cannot be the genetic mutation to be responsible for this acceleration. At that time, the paradigm was you need only two things. You have to be genetically predisposed, and you need to be exposed to something in the environment that put in motion your genetic predisposition.
Yeah.
They're necessary, but not sufficient. Because how do you explain that in 30, 40 years, we see this huge increase in autoimmune disease, neurodegenerative disease like Alzheimer and dementia and Parkinson, cancer, allergic diseases, and so on and so forth. The genetic takes generation for accumulating mutations that are responsible for this kind of changes.
Right.
And this is only one generation. So there was something else, and this was that we change our lifestyle so impactfully in such a short period of time that friendly relationship with the microbes has been put off balance. And because the microbes are capable to communicate with us, now this imbalance translates in a much more frequent switch from this genetic predisposition to clinical outcome. What I explain is what we call technically epigenetics. So the crisp editing of the genes is something that you artificially do by mutating the gene or making the gene do different things. Microbes, they do this all the time.
Right.
They don't do anything else but instructing our genes how to eventually turn on and turn off. And that will dictate our destiny. That's the reason why taking care of our microbiome, particularly our gut microbiome, will really dictate our destiny. And, we are in the verge to understand this crosstalk and what went wrong if you embrace a Western lifestyle in terms of accelerating these chronic inflammatory diseases. So this is the concept of the microbiome. This is the concept of epigenetics. And that's the reason why we better take care of this community, because if we take care of them, they would take care of us.
Yeah, beautiful. What a fantastic summary. You did your best to simplify it for the masses, and I think you did a wonderful job, because I've got a lot of questions for you as a result. So, few observations. I come from an Indian origin, right? So originally from India, parents are from India and so on. And so I'm aware of naturopathic diets. I'm aware of Ayurveda, right? Ayurvedic diets, Ayurvedic medicine, Ayurvedic diets, and so on and so forth. And I'm sure this is something that you've looked at in studies as well. And it's phenomenal because certain spices and certain herbs and condiments, haldi or turmeric is a good example, with pepper or pepper, when they come together, they're like, whoa, they can really help you massively. And many, many others that, I tend to use regularly. Triphala, there is amla, there are various others that some people would have never heard of, and now it's becoming popular because Western alternative, commercial, supplement providers have discovered this and put them into little capsules or pills and then sell them for a lot of money to the masses, right, in the West. And even then, those dosages are a joke because actually they've been massively diluted, and the compounds aren't as pure as you could get from the source, for example. So this is a different discussion. But I also notice and I'm taking the conversation in a slightly different direction because you talked about the West. So I do want to talk about the East momentarily. And you are right, the East may not have the severity of problems at the pace at which you're referring to. I agree. However, I must say that the pace at which that awareness is changing and diminishing in the new generations in countries like India, where 600 million people in India are under the age of 28, the young people, and their diet is influenced massively by the American way of doing things. So American startup revolution is cool, and so is having Domino's pizza when you're working at 9 o'clock at night, which of course is everywhere in the major cities in India. Now, I'm not saying Domino's pizza is bad. That's not what we're saying here, so I don't want to get sued for it. But what we're really saying here is that the food chain, which I want to just get your perspective on, something's gone wrong there. Now, for example, I have an intolerance to dairy. I've been drinking dairy all my life. In fact, I survived on dairy. I love it. Now I can't tolerate it, and it's got worse. So I'm taking alternative milk. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know. Tell me a little bit more about your awareness of as you talk about lifestyle, you talk about environment. That's a climate, environment, realism.
So
food.
I believe there have been three epochal changes in human evolution that brought us wherever we are.
Right. Okay.
One was the advent of agriculture. 10,000 years ago, we moved from a nomadic lifestyle to settler by domesticating crops and animals. This was a good thing because, of course, before that, gatherers hunters spend 95% of the time of procurement of food and 5% of reproduction. No time to do anything else.
Right.
Once you free up the time for food procurement because you domesticate the crops and animals, now you have the time to think and be creative and building stuff and so on and so forth. And you build the civilization as we know. The second epochal changes happened with urbanization, meaning that now, while in the past, when I say in the past, I'm talking about your grandparents, not God knows how long ago.
Yeah.
Everybody was farmer producing their own stuff. And if they produce more of something, they exchange with a neighbor farmer that produced more of something else. So everybody was consumer and producer at the same time. Now, with urbanization, you have consumers that cannot produce anything. So the farmer needs to step up and produce for themselves and for the people that are living in the cities that do not produce any goods. And that was not a good thing, because with that came the pollution, came with the massive production of stuff and so on and so forth. But the kiss of death in the West Hemisphere, came with the globalization. Now, multinational companies took over the production of goods. So, and they, in a few hands, now you have this massive production. We have very few farmers, the way that we're, I'm talking about Western Hemisphere, that the way that we intended in the past. So they cannot compete with this huge, multinational, companies that produce massive amount of stuff. And when you do that, you compromise on quality. You compromise the way that you grow your crops. If you lose 10% of your crops with this massive production, that will be a disaster. And you do whatever it takes to avoid that. Use chemicals, use whatever, in some countries, GMOs and so on and so forth. So the question being that the key elements that make us to survive, i.e. food, dramatically changed during these three epochal, changes in lifestyle. Yeah. And we took 2 million years of evolution to build an unbelievable, phenomenal car, a Ferrari that will require in the tank to have super pure gasoline, all right, to perform at the best capabilities. And now what we put in the tank is water. And we wonder why we don't perform the way we're supposed to. So, there are many things that impinge on the composition and function of the microbiome. The way that you're born, a C-section, that vaginal delivery, your mother's style before being born, that's she smokes, drinks, she lives in the urban area, rural area, pollution, and so on and so forth, antibiotic use, whatever. But these are all conditions. We eat 3-4 times a day. And these microbes, they eat whatever we eat. Going back to the parallel of the farm with different animals, if we plan to have 1,000 chicken and 10 cows, they eat different things. Now you feed them differently, and now you feed more the cows, and you don't give enough food for the chicken. Guess what? You're not going to have chicken in your farm. And your farm is not balanced the way they're supposed to be. And you're going to pay consequences. And that's out of metaphor. It's what has been happening. The most impactful reason why there is this surge of this condition is the fact that nutrition is radically changed over time because we don't have the time to cook, because we junk. And of course, by doing that, we create those kind of conditions. Now, you talk about principle in the East culture, they are extremely important to keep you healthy. And this needs to bring another concept in the matter. Any kind of condition that you want to talk about, your, autoimmune disease or food allergies, or again, cancer, whatever, has a common denominator. And common denominator is inflammation.
Right. Yeah.
And the inflammation is driving this uphill, situation there. So you can live in India, but then you embrace a Western lifestyle because you eat junk, whatever junk you want to define, you're going to pay the same price that you live in Los Angeles. No question about that. And again, the question is, do we want to live a better life?
Yeah.
Sure enough, we should not go back in the cave and live like a caveman. That will not be conceivable. But we can have common sense to protect our microbiome, because if we do that, that will have dividends on our health. And again, you can do that in a couple ways, not mutually exclusive. You use principles in food or herbs or tubers or roots, as it's done in Eastern countries. They have anti-inflammatory properties. They can really turn off inflammation. This is called nutraceutical. Nutraceutical.
Okay.
But the same principle can have a beneficial impact on the composition and function on the microbiome. Put again a little bit of rules in the game. If you go back to inflammation and you said, how do you develop that? You have, as you in your podcast, you have 4 areas of interest. Inflammation is based on 5 pillars. Okay. 2 that we discussed already. Genetics, you have to be genetically predisposed to develop, lactose intolerance or intolerance to dairy. And you have to be exposed to the environmental trigger, in this case, cow's milk. They're necessary, but not sufficient. You got to have 3 other things. You have to have an increased gut permeability, meaning that this stuff from the environment needs to come in your body, and the port of entry in general is the gut. And we discussed about this at the beginning of the chat, of this increased permeability with the zonulin that is a biomarker of this increased permeability. You have to have a hyperbelligerent immune system, because after all, you're talking about inflammation. So you got to have the inflammation fueled by the immune system. And of course, last and not least, in the discussion we're having today, a microbiome that is off balance. And the last 3, they're highly interconnected. If you have an increased gut permeability, your immune system will become hyperbelligerent. And if you have a lot of inflammation, your gut will leak more. If you have a gut that leaks, the microbiome goes off balance. And if the microbiome is off balance, it will cause gut leak and so on and so forth. So if the 5 pillars are the ones that I told you are responsible, make us sick. genetic, you can't take it out.
Yeah.
With all respect to CRISP, you can't. We're not even close, because many of these conditions, there are hundreds, if not thousands, genes involved, and we don't know them all. Okay. Taking the environmental trigger out means that we have to go back to a lifestyle. Nobody is willing to do that. That leaves us three possibilities. One that we're going after right now: turn off the inflammation by put a brake, meaning using steroids, biologics, and so on and so forth. But you treat the consequence and not the cause. The cause is still there.
Yes, correct.
And you pay huge price by doing that, but we don't have an alternative now. The promise is to deal with the microbiome. If I can change the microbiome composition and function, I may eventually epigenetically switch off the genes that I turn on, and eventually take control of my inflammatory process again. That's where we are right now. We're not there yet. We're not at the point in which we know exactly how to do that, but we are creating the foundational information that will create the condition that we can customize through artificial intelligence, and we can discuss a little bit how intervention to reassess my microbiome to make sure that we are in a symbiotic friendly relationship, and therefore that inflammation will be turned off, because the genes that drive this inflammation will be switched on or off, depending what is the story there. Until we can customize, the common sense is, let's eat the most healthy way possible, because this is the low-hanging fruits right now, until we'll be able to have all the information to make sure that my microbiome is in balance, and therefore will be helpful for me to maintain a state of health. Yeah.
Can I go back to the why and some of the fixes? So you talk a lot about prebiotic, probiotic, postbiotic. Can you just educate us on what is the difference? Because of course the common person buys a prebiotic from the local shop, and I guess the decision making is a little bit flawed. We buy the most expensive one. I bought one for $50. That's got to be much better than the one for $5. Could you help us dispel some myths, if there is a myth around this, and what should we be doing actually in terms of fix? Yeah.
So there is a lot of myth, and of course, like any time that there is a new shift of paradigm, a new field, there are people that rush into that field and try to make profit out of it, even without having the information. But let's make clear what we're talking about. Prebiotics is the food that is good for the good bacteria, the good microorganism that will help us. So typical prebiotics are, human mono-oligosaccharides, for example, in the breast milk. There are sugars that will feed the right microbiota that will be helpful for me. That's one of the major advantages, for example, to use, to feed breast milk in babies, because there are these small sugars that will feed the right microbiota to keep me healthy. These are the prebiotics. Food for the good bacteria, for the good microorganism. Probiotics are the good bacteria, the ones that help us to stay healthy, the one that put peace in this ecosystem, that the gut or any other ecosystem. Postbiotics are products produced by the good bacteria. They are good for our health. For example, some of these probiotics, they use fibers that, by the way, are in a short supply in who embrace Western lifestyle, because we don't have enough fibers in our diet. Other fibers, they may eventually produce substance like, short-chain fatty acids. And those short-chain fatty acids, postbiotics, are good for our health because we maintain an anti-inflammatory environment, so to speak. So that's different between prebiotics, probiotics, and postbiotics. What you buy in the store right now are formulations based on, again, this kind of information, but not customized for my needs. So let's say that, I personally developed disease X because I lost lactobacillus, one probiotic that is not in my gut or in my, lung anymore, and that will increase my risk of inflammation. If the formulation doesn't have lactobacillus, but has a bifidobacterium, that is another probiotic, that will not be good for me. So that's why customization will be important. We will get there. But we are not quite there yet, because in order to choose the right probiotics, I need to know what is wrong with my ecosystem.
Right. The diagnosis. You need to do the diagnosis.
That's right. I need to, in other words, study the microbiome. That's something that I can do in the lab. And some companies, they claim that they can do already, for a big fee to you. But again, we don't have the rules yet. We don't know what is a quote unquote normal microbiome, because there is no such a thing. Everybody has its own customized microbiome. So this needs to be put in the concept of where you are, where you live, your sex, your age, your genetics. Then the microbiome, composition will have a sense, and I can use that as a target for intervention to customize the probiotics. Why we don't get there? And again, this takes a lot of people and machine learning and artificial intelligence. Why we don't get that? The common sense is, let's use natural approaches, like you guys have been doing the yeast all the time. So eat well, using natural source of probiotics, like, yogurt, for example. Use natural source of postbiotic, like fermented food. These are the stuff that our grandparents and great-grandparents, without knowing what they were doing, were using to ameliorate, social problems. We will be able to go in a store about the proper probiotics to treat my condition, but we're not quite there yet.
Is that why sometimes, that's fascinating, by the way, is that why sometimes when people do take, let's say it's an amalgamation of pre-post, pre-pro-post, that they actually don't feel well? There's some people who say, I took prebiotics. Oh, mate, my stomach was bloated. I started to feel sick. And then they can't figure out what's the issue. That maybe I don't have a microbiome issue. That's what those are the conclusions they jump to.
But, going back again to the farm parallel, let's say that indeed now you have too many cows and too little chicken, and that's the reason why you don't feel well. And you take the probiotics in which you give more cows. You will not help. You need more chicken. You don't know that until we got there. There is no way to do it.
Do you think you gave a great example of the earlier trends? You talked about the agriculture, urbanization, globalization, the extremities that are coming from it, and therefore that big rise in those chronic conditions and so on in the West in particular. Do you think the treatments that are more natural, like the yogurt and the fermented food, maybe I'm throwing it out there, was that okay when the severity was manageable? Right? When it's okay, it's fine, just have it as a hygiene factor. But when the severity is really high, like you've screwed up your farm to such an extent, are those treatments still powerful enough to address the microbiome gaps that you have?
So before that I answer the question, there is a concept that I have to put on the table here.
Okay.
One thing is prevention, the other one is treatment.
Okay.
When the horse is already out of the barn, meaning that you have a disease that now it's severe enough, let's say that you have a cancer.
Right.
You can't pretend to treat this with symbiotic or probiotics or prebiotics. It's not going to happen. The disease went too far. It is extremely complicated to manage that by manipulating the microbiome. Would not be logical, because now, you are a few steps remote from what the microbiome can help you with. So prevention, on the other hand, is something that is much more manageable in using this kind of intervention. Again, before that we started, you asked me to really eventually talk about something that is hot and new. One of the major limitations of the study in the microbiome is that, we take a population of people that have a disease, let's say type 1 diabetes or Alzheimer's. And we study their microbiome. And then we take a control, population, same age, same sex, and so on, and so they're healthy, and we study their microbiome. And we see a difference. And we put that leap of faith conclusion, they developed type 1 diabetes or Alzheimer's because of the microbiome is different, and that's the reason why. But that's not necessarily true. The problem is that who is the chicken, who is the egg? I can make the argument because I have Alzheimer, I don't eat the way that I used to, or the way that a normal individual use, or because type 1 diabetes, I'm forced to not eat, too many sugars, and that would impinge on the microbiome composition. So this is the consequence and not the cause. So the only way that mechanistically I can link the microbiome changes to a disease is to follow over time.
Yeah.
And you can't do this with Alzheimer. You should follow this individual for 70 years to see before the onset of the disease. You need to do this with diseases that materialize very early in life. And we have done this with two conditions. One, celiac disease. You mentioned that, that's my clinical expertise. Vast majority, not all, the vast majority of cases, they develop early in life, in the first 5 years of life. The other one is autism. And this opened another big issue of the gut-brain axis.
Wow. Okay.
So if you follow these kids from birth, and you choose kids that are at risk because someone in the family already had celiac disease or autism, and you follow over time, you will eventually be capable to see shift of the microbiome that may eventually precede the onset of the disease and come up with the idea what it takes to take a wrong term and switch epigenetically these genes that start that march from genetic predisposition to clinical outcome.
Got it.
We've been doing this for 10 years now. So we've been doing this for a long time.
Right.
And I can tell you that, if you take kids, for example, with celiac disease, a risk for celiac disease, neonates, and you start to follow them over time, some of them, unfortunately, take the wrong direction and they develop the disease. Some that start from the same starting line, keep going and stay healthy. And you ask, is there anything that predicts what these kids will do if they take the wrong turn that will lead to the wrong final destination? And the answer is, it's the change in the microbiome. These changes happen month before the onset of the disease.
Interesting.
How do we know that? Because we collect huge amount of data on these kids. We know all their genome. We know all the microbiome. We know hundreds and hundreds of clinical data. We know the metabolic pathways because we studied the metabolome. And we put all this data in a machine learning, digital modeling and mathematical modeling that tell me of all these hundreds of thousands, millions of data that I'm putting there, can you give me the minimal number of data that predict with great level of confidence who is going the wrong direction and who stays straight? And the answer is, believe it or not, boils down to the fact that the ones that stay healthy, they maintain a balanced microbiome. The ones that go the wrong direction, they lose only 5 elements, 5 species of the microbiome, 5. They're all probiotics, by the way. And if you don't have those, your chance to develop celiac disease is almost 90%. And we know this months before the onset of disease.
Interesting.
That means that once we can validate this with larger numbers, with machine learning, neural network approach, and so on and so forth, I can eventually take half son or daughter that has the risk for whatever autoimmune disease that you have in the family, doing this kind of analysis and say, oh my gosh, that deviation that predicts the wrong direction, I see in the microbiome in this kid, he or she is missing these kind of strains. And now I give that strains back in to bring them back to the right direction so that I intercept the disease. This means primary prevention of an autoimmune disease, that this will be revolutionary. But this is what we're going to see coming. Imagine if you can do this with, kids with, autism. Of all the huge increase that we have seen, autism is the one that worries me the most. In the 70s was 1 in 5,000, 1 in 56. That's what we have right now.
Wow.
1 in 56. And if you consider that the ratio male-female is 4-1, the next generation, one boy out of 4 we lose for autism. This is unacceptable. Unacceptable. Yeah. There is something that is absolutely needed to be done. And I believe that the microbiome manipulation would be the key to eventually ameliorate this acceleration.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that's just, it's incredible. I never really appreciated the link between autism and, because this is an area of study for us as well in terms of neurocognidiversity and the microbiome. I have a question for you around people taking drugs and medication, right? So when you think about the destruction of the microbiome or the imbalanced environment you can create through all of the factors that we've discussed, the other is, of course, yes, you talked about antibiotics. That's one. Of course, there's mass overusage of antibiotics all over the world. In fact, sometimes we complain here in the United Kingdom, which is where I live in London. We do complain, oh, I can't access, antibiotics. I have to go to the doctor. The doctor takes ages and so on. And of course, that has some downsides. It's because of the system that has been created. On the other hand, I have seen systems where you can buy antibiotics from any pharmacy. Okay, it's sort of like on tap. And India is a good example. And also in the States, I've seen it in the United States. And so the consumption of antibiotics is way higher because, of course, you just don't feel, well, it's like taking a paracetamol equivalent for people. They don't even take paracetamols or, Aleve or whatever the equivalent is. You just sort of pop the antibiotics. And a lot of people, a lot of people know that it's a quick fix and they don't always see they don't always, go through the course. I don't know whether I'd be interested in your perspective on whether people actually need to go through 7 days or is 2.5, 3 days okay if you're feeling much better? Because maybe the longer you have it, the more the destruction it causes in your guts. So my first question really is antibiotics and microbiomes. I mean, what is your general sense here based on evidence?
So, of course, the discovery of penicillin that started the era of antibiotics has been revolutionary. Yeah. So I don't want to demonize antibiotics. And if I have a kids with meningitis, by all means, the balance of pros and cons is to go with antibiotics. No question about that. Yeah. Or pneumonia, of course, you don't have an alternative. However, and I'm not breaking great news here, the vast majority of infection, particularly early in life, are viral of nature. And antibiotics, they do nothing for viral infection. So what you do is you give antibiotics to somebody that doesn't need it, so you don't fix the problem. And at the same time, you jeopardize the composition and a function of the microbiome with tremendous consequences. So one of the predictors, again, of the studies that I was telling you before, that will make kids at risk to develop C. disease is the excessive use of antibiotics. The more antibiotic you use, the more likely you may eventually develop the problem. And again, this has been described for many, chronic inflammatory diseases. So like any intervention that we do, it's a matter of cost-benefit ratio. I pay the price to use an anti-tumoral drug because otherwise I would be dead if I didn't do that. But I know that I will pay the price of the side effects. That will be not an easy, thing because I now put me at risk to develop severe infections because I'm a break on my immune system to defend me against this infection. But once you go the cost-benefit ratio, you go for that. Same story with antibiotics. If I don't treat somebody with antibiotics, I know that I will pay dear consequence because I have evidence that an infection is due to a microorganism, a bacterium, that is sensitive, by the way, to that particular antibiotic, and I've got to do that. But most of the time, we do not need this. So I'm glad that there are still in UK a safeguard of a healthcare professional can tell you, oh yeah, you deserve to take antibiotic. Oh, you can just take paracetamol to control your fever. That will go away because it will do its course because it's due to a viral infection. The other thing is, talking back to the diet, one of the major problems that probably caused the acceleration of this chronic inflammatory disease, that we use antibiotics in farming, meaning to make, animals to grow fast.
Correct.
We use antibiotics and, hormones. And so even if I've been savvy to not take antibiotics, and now I eat, that meat from a veal that has been, or a cow that has been, given antibiotics to grow fast, I'm taking antibiotics at this point. So, that's part of the Westernization lifestyle that brought us wherever we are right now.
And last couple of questions. I know we're running out of time, but what fascinating insights. Going back to the second part of my question, when someone is taking certain pills, let's say you're diabetic or you're taking certain medication for some diseases, people tend to take them every day, of course, and they at night or in the morning. And I do, for example, I take a whole bunch of pills. And the doctors generally say, well, they're quite strong, so have some lansoprazole or have some omeprazole, okay? And so, again, one of the interesting things in the UK, they don't mandate any form of probiotic, prebiotic. It's not a discussion. Supplements and nothing like that is a discussion. It's not preventative at all. It's like, just take some lansoprazole if you feel a bit funny in your tummy. What's your view on those sorts of things versus the story around microbiome?
Well, again, we ingest every day gazillions of microorganisms, gazillions. The vast majority are killed in the stomach because of the high acidity.
Yeah.
So, the one that passes on the other side, now we decide who can stay because it's convenient for us and who can go. But once you don't have that first selection by the acidity in the stomach because you're taking antacid like omeprazole, now there's this huge flow of microorganisms. I can't make the choice anymore. I don't have the capability to handle this huge crowd, and the chance that I develop dysbiosis is much, much higher. This was not appreciated until the recent past. So once again, you have an ulcer or you have a severe gastritis, by all means, you need to take a antacid medication for the time that is necessary.
Right.
But to use this in such a cavalier way, say, my tummy hurts, maybe that I take the antacid, maybe that you just eat less spicy food, less coffee, you don't smoke that much. That would be a better way to handle that use the antacids. Yeah. So it's the bottom line. It's a matter of lifestyle. Again, we've been focused on nutrition because it's the most impactful. But the Western lifestyle, it's ruin our microbiome composition and function because we don't live the way that we're supposed to. We don't sleep well. We're too stressed out. We don't have a physical activity, constant that will keep us, in an healthy way. So it's not that just I eat well and that will do it. Yeah. It's the entire lifestyle that needs to change. Again, I'm not advocating to go back to the cave, but the COVID-19 gave us a pause of reflection to say, you know what, probably the priority in life have been, changed in a way that we didn't realize. And now we give priority to stuff that may not be that important. If you ask 1,000 people, what is the thing that is important in your life, your health or your wealth? I'm assuming that the vast majority say, you know what, I may be okay for now that I'm wealthy, provided I'm healthy.
Correct.
And we made the wrong decision because, we now, I hope that this will change, but I've been focused always to be successful, to be an entrepreneur, to be competitive, no matter what. But when you sleep 4 hours a day, you are totally stressed out. You ruin your family because your kids, they don't even know who you are because they see just you in a picture. Or even worse, you don't have a family, around you that supports you because you're not being able to build up, that kind of network that allows you to build a family. Or you have a family and you ruin this because it's falling apart. What good does it to you? I mean, so I believe that the best way or the best lesson that we can, get to the disaster that we live right now is that we better take care of ourselves health-wise, because, it's not important to live 90 years at all costs. It doesn't matter if I live 90 years old, 30 of which on a wheelchair with tube in my nose, and depending on somebody that pushed my wheelchair. That's not the way that we want to live. We want to live an active life until whenever it's our destiny. And again, we didn't have the time to touch not only on the gut-brain axis, but longevity. Longevity, how do you age? Aging depends on your microbiome. There are people that age very graciously, and they are active in the 80s and 90s because the lifestyle take good care of the microbiome. And aging, like any other things, is a matter of inflammation. Now you inflame too much, you can't repair anymore, and now you go off balance until you die. And there are people, they crash because they look 80 when they're 50. So all this to say, taking good care of microbiome by sleeping hygiene, physical exercise, good health, not being too stressed out, build a community around you. Don't take life too seriously. Laugh at yourself. Will make, people to live a better life. And that's what I believe will make also society better. Because if you live that kind of life and you put everything in perspective, we will have less wars. If we have natural disaster, as unfortunately we experience in Turkey and
Syria,
Syria, you will have people flooding there and help each other rather than making second guess. Who this is my friend, this is my enemy. I don't want to go to Syria. I don't want to go to Turkey, and so on and so forth. So I'm a little bit idealistic here, but what I'm trying to say is we lost the perspective of priority in life. And going back to the 4 pillars of your podcast, we should take care in an interconnected way of all this. And, again, making progress, it's natural, human behavior, but making progress to our own return with, using properly, artificial intelligence, using properly macroeconomic information, using properly human health, and so on and so forth, will make us a better society.
It's beautiful. I mean, I think one of the most important takeaways today for me, and of course for many other people, people take different things away from a conversation, I think is this circling back to the basics, And I'll share something interesting with you. Many of the interviews that I've done with numerous experts, pretty much the most consistent message that comes out every single time is this idea of being human again. And being human means different things, but actually what it means is going back to simplicity, going back to equilibrium, stability, balance, going back to doing all of the things that make us human, not AI. And it means removing things immediately as much as it means adding things, adding good things, removing all the things that we know are destroying us. Today's reminder around the importance of the microbiome, what's going on within us. I mean, we all complain about it, for Christ's sake. I mean, we all do. Someone in a room, you take 10 people, everyone's got a story about their gut. I mean, it's guaranteed, pretty much guaranteed. At some stage in the week or in the month, someone's like, oh, so much acidity. Oh, I had to take the antacid again. Oh, I've got a bad tummy. Oh, I've got this and I've got that. And it is to do with what you're putting in. And I think you've reminded us of the scientific and the evidence that supports much of this, of course, with the credibility that you have, that it makes a huge difference, Alessio. I've really enjoyed,
sorry. I want to close because you talk about balance with one person information, so that we start with personal information and finish with that. I'm coming from Salerno, at the south of Italy. There was the cradle of the Scuola Medica Salernitana, the first medical school in the Western Hemisphere. At that time, medicine was a mix of religion, of philosophy, astronomy, and that kind of stuff. But they have a principle. Health means balance. There are the 4 elements, fire, wind, water, and earth. And, when you go off balance, you are sick. And the idea is to go in balance, to stay in the center. So that all the elements are balanced. And to do that, they already had the savviness to understand that you take care of yourself and your surrounding. Your microbiome will suffer if you have a polluted water. Your microbiome will suffer because of global warming. Your microbiome will suffer if we have pandemics that are human generated. So what I'm trying to say, we're not living in a vacuum, because there is a circle of life. These microorganisms are in the soil, are in the water, are in the air. We acquire them by drinking and eating stuff, and then we release them in the environment. So if we don't take care of the environment, if we don't take care of our neighbors, if we don't take care, in other words, of this whole ecosystem, it's not that if we pollute in India, we don't pay consequences in United States. It's not that, if we don't help people in India, I say India because you're from there, or in Italy, to make sure that they make the right choice, everybody will pay consequences. It's not that we can compartmentalize this word. So we should take care of Mother Earth, as the indigenous or Indians from the United States had very clear in mind, if we want to stay well. And Mother Earth means the microbiome, that is a circle of life. And therefore, we do that, we may revert this tendency to increase chronic inflammatory disease, and we will live better life.
Beautifully summarized. And you're right, we do have to take care of Mother Earth. And today's been so informative, so powerful, so compelling, and you've articulated something that I'm no doubt is complex because of the scientific aspects of it in such a beautiful way. Many of our listeners will hopefully make a change in their lives. And this is not just about intellectual satisfaction, right? These podcasts, this is about taking some action, be it in your life or someone else's life or wider, to help humanity. So I've taken that away from today. A final thing, last few seconds, what has the experience been like for you today? Of course, I'm sure you do a lot of talks, but I'd love your input or feedback on how the last hour or so has been for you.
Like everything in life, there are good doctor, bad doctor. There are good, lawyers and bad lawyers. That there are good podcaster and bad podcasters. I think that the outcome of this chat speaks by itself. You are phenomenal. You ask the right questions. I enjoy it tremendously. So I'm pretty sure that we can discuss another 5 hours and more of issues like this. But we encapsulated what I believe is our key messages. And you can do that only if a journalist, if it's an interviewer, touch the right chord. So I appreciate that.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much, Alessio. We'll be in touch. We will definitely watch you and track the next book and all of your research. Are you open to people trying to discover you or find you? Have you got a website, or where can people find you generally?
Absolutely. Even if I don't want to, we live in a global village of communication. So we are very active in social media. And again, we do that because we really care of what is our mission, to make life of our patients and their family better.
Yeah, beautiful. Excellent. Well, we will push this out in the next couple of weeks. Real pleasure to see you. Thank you. If you haven't bought the book, go buy the book, read the 500 pages because it's so important for your life. And if you can't reference it, go through chapter to chapter, and at a minimum, start to take action around protecting, the gut. Your feelings will be much better if you look after your gut. So thank you so much.
I want to make the point that Susan and I want no money in this book. Whatever comes out of the selling goes back to research. So we don't make no profit with that.
Fantastic. That is beautiful, noble. Thank you. That's very important that you shared that, because people want to give back in their own way, and buying the book is giving back in itself. So I will be cheeky and I'll drop you an email and see if I'll send you a copy. If you could sign the copy for me, because for my children in the future, 25 years down the line, whether they'll enjoy books and they'll think, what the hell did Dad do here? Who wants this? Who wants this hard copy? What is this thing? It's like the old typewriter. I still want to keep that as a memory. Yeah, exactly. So I'll reach out to you. But thank you so much, Alessio. It's been a real pleasure. Look forward to seeing you soon. Keep yourself happy and well, and thank you for all your knowledge.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.